So, Seth, your show has gotten so much better as the country has gotten so much worse.
Oh, well, thank you. It's glad somebody's coming out ahead.
I wonder, like, how do you reconcile yourself with that?
Well, I would trade it in a heartbeat, but it's been nice to have built this infrastructure for our show that can react to things that happen every day. And it was interesting because I think we thought the campaign would end and then we'd have to move on to something else. I keep saying we thought the election was the World Series, and it turned out it was just spring training for this. So, who knows how long this will last, how long people will have this thirst for the day-to-day of it, but I'm just glad we have the ability to address it.
To that end, I mean, your closer look segments have become the staple of your show, and reflections on the day's news. Are you guys ever up to the minute just afraid that you might miss something that occurs?
Sure. Well, again, I think historically things didn't happen after 6 p.m. in Washington, D.C., and so we were built in a way that we wouldn't miss it because we tape at 6:30. And I remember a couple months ago we had Mike Flynn got fired between when we taped and when the show aired. So all of a sudden, in a 6-hour period, we were behind the news cycle. This week alone, the Comey firing and then the Russian conversations that happened in the Oval Office, these were all things that were breaking in a way that we would have to scramble to even get a mention in. And then we're sort of always weighing, okay, well, we can mention it, but we're not going to be able to process it into a piece that we're going to be happy with. So sometimes you just have to say, hey, this happened today, and obviously if you tune in tomorrow, we'll have a lot more to say about it.
How do you find humor in this kind of absurd mess?
Well, I think you answered it with a question. It is absurd. I mean, there is a natural humor to it. You can't believe the way people are talking about it, the way they're reacting. It all, again, we had David Mandel on the show who works on Veep, and he was talking that he's jealous that he didn't come up with some of these plot points for his comedy that are actually happening in real life. So the comedy is there for the taking. I think it's just making sure, and we try very hard at the end of each closer look, and to some degree in the beginning, to have a thesis statement of, hey, there will be, over the course of this 10 minutes, we're going to have a lot of jokes, but this is the actual thing that happened, and this is why it's important, and this is ultimately what it could be the fallout of the things that happened today.
Can you touched on that a bit. I wonder if you could expand on the point of view in the comedy.
Yeah. Well, again, I think comedy today, it's very hard to find comedians who don't have a point of view, and I think that's always been where it comes from. And we have this compact with audiences now of, hey, this is who I am, and you're tuning in because you have some sense of who I am and want to know what I think about these things. And so we're very lucky to live in this comedy era that I think was hastened by people like Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert and that sort of Daily Show, Colbert Report revolution that happened, where all of a sudden you could talk about the news and people had an expectation as opposed to would turn it off.
What do you look for in guests that come on to the show?
Well, I think there's this type of guest, the A-list guest that any talk show would love to have, and then you're allowed sort of in your second and third guest to find people that maybe fit your DNA more than others. I love the fact that we can have authors on. I find especially fiction authors, it turns out they're all great storytellers, whether they've been on TV or not. They are really wonderful to hear talk about the writing process. It's great to have people, mostly for me, that I'm genuinely interested in what they have to say, and so that's where we try to fill the back half of our show out with.
The great thing about shows like this these days is that not only do people watch them at 12:30, but they watch them online on your YouTube page. How did the age of the internet affect your show?
We had this sense when we started the show of, hey, we're probably not going to be a viral show. That's not, the things that were sort of famously viral on late night shows were not anywhere near my skill set, and we didn't want to do that really awkward thing of chasing things that I would be so markedly worse at than the people who were doing them well. And we never thought that Closer Look would grow into this thing that people watch the next day, and we're obviously very happy about it, but at the end of the day, you still have to focus on the show you're doing that hour. And if you build that with the same integrity every day, you kind of hope that stuff will get watched the next day. But ultimately, our focus is day of.
You did Weekend Update on SNL. I wonder how that prepared you for what you're doing now?
It was funny. In the end, the way it prepared me for it was something I ran from when our show started, which is just being someone who's settled at a desk and very good at sort of directing things to camera. And I, could have run farther away from that when we first started by trying to do a conventional monologue and wanting to show people, oh, look, I have this other great skill, where it turns out one skill is a perfectly fine thing to have in television. Yeah. So strangely, just getting behind the desk and doing sort of a more update style monologue indirectly led to doing something like A Closer Look, because we were already there, and it just was a much better transition to A Closer Look than I think doing a monologue would have been. I think that would have been a jarring transition, and so we needed one to get to the other, and just again, we didn't plan it as much as it kind of just fell into our laps.
I wanted to talk to you about Documentary Now, the show you do with that you do with Fred Armisen and Bill Hader. The first season of that show, you guys got nominated for an Emmy, and it was very well received. So, what was the attitude like going into season 2?
Well, again, like with most TV, we were well into season 2 when we were lucky enough to be nominated for the first season. All we ever wanted with this show was to make the kind of show that we would have loved to watch. And from the very beginning, it was based on this sketch at SNL. Bill was smart enough to say, hey, I think a show like this would be really special. And we know we're not making a show that's going to have empire numbers. So we can just really shave down and say, hey, there's this group of people who are going to watch this show, and it's going to be really special to them. So let's only ever aim for them, and let's only make this show for the people that would be most likely to watch it. And it's been a great outcome because of that.
How do you guys select the films that you're going to satirize?
We basically, because of how our schedules are so different and we're all over the place, we have managed both seasons to have 2 days in LA where we spend a couple afternoons talking about shows and trying to think of different jokes and turns within them. It's mostly, though, the one rule has always been, let's choose things we love and try to find stuff from different eras so that nothing looks too similar. And I want to give great credit to Alex Buono and Rhys Thomas, who are the directors. They kind of come to us as well with their requests, which is, we'd love to do something in black and white. We'd love to do something that is shaky handheld, and then it's just weaning it down and trying to make sure we have a take on it that is unique enough to make it worth our time.
You guys do such a great job of recreating the visual styles of those documentaries. Can you talk a bit about that?
Again, only to say that I consume that part the same way you do. I'm not a visual technician, and for example, I wrote this Juan Likes Chicken and Rice episode this year, and then you just sort of give a script to these guys, and they and Fred go off to Colombia, and you have no sense of how it's going, and then they a few months later say, we'd like to send you something, and you just watch in awe. You can't believe that somebody took these dumb words that you sort of pounded out on a keyboard and actually turned it into something that looks that beautiful.
What were some highlights of this last season for you?
That was an episode I really loved. There was we had an episode that it turned out schedule-wise and time-wise we couldn't pull off, and so Bill and John Mulaney got together and wrote Parker Gale, which was something they could shoot in an afternoon, and I was just stunned by how well that turned out. And again, anytime Fred does one of these where he actually goes out and writes an album's worth of songs, that then I start singing to myself and I forget that they're not actually real songs that I heard in the 80s, but rather a parody song that I heard 6 months ago.
I remember that 2-party you guys had from last year that was satirizing the Eagles documentary.
Yeah.
Speaking of Fred and Bill, what is that collaboration like between the three of you?
Well, again, the great thing is because of our lives, this show would only work if we all had a shorthand. We can't go through the normal process of notes and feedback. And you also have to have a great amount of trust and sometimes say, hey, I can't be on set, but whatever you guys think. Or Bill will call me and say, hey, the ending you wrote for Globesman we think will be too sad, and we think this will be better. And I just say, oh yeah, whatever you guys think. You're the one that's there. I have so much faith in your taste that just go ahead and do it. And then for me, it's just that great gift of being a writer at SNL is there's this incredible cast, which is basically this toolbox of people that do things and elevate your work like no one else. And so I'm just so happy that there's still this thing where I can turn work over to these guys who do things with it that blow my mind.
Going back to the Late Show, I know you do this every night, so it might be harder to come up with highlights from that. But are there like specific episodes of this last season that you think stand out from the rest?
Well, it's weird. We were just saying, you don't think about it in terms of episodes as much as you did at SNL, because there's so many of them, and I can never remember if this was A guest, who was B guest. That there's no connection anymore. It's very modular. But I will say, really loved being in DC. That was a lot of fun to take the show on the road and realize that we had built a thing that we could move. Was nice. It was very cathartic for me personally to have a show the night after the election and to be able to put my thoughts on paper and say them to an audience. I would say the angriest I was this year was when Donald Trump said that he was the one who ended the birther controversy, and I was, again, that was a time where having a show to give voice to that anger was I felt very blessed. So those are some that stand out. But then in general, it's just the day-to-day grind. This is a baseball season compared to SNL, which was a bit of a football season, and so you just kind of have to get out there every day.
You mentioned the night of the election, and I did want to ask you about that because I guess take us back to that night and when you're having to come up with a response
Sure.
to what happened.
Well, I was having a really hard time sleeping because, again, could not have been more wrong. Every time Donald Trump says we were wrong, like that put me right there. And I just kind of kept waking up and having thoughts and sort of writing them down. And it was just a case of getting in the next day and nobody really knowing quite what to do or how to address it. And that night we did not do a monologue. We just kind of opened on me sharing those thoughts. But it was, again, I think a lot of people felt the same way I did, which was very surprised and disappointed. And I just felt lucky that I had a chance to lay those thoughts out.
Obviously, we have no idea what the outcome of all this is going to be.
Yeah.
So I wonder, how does your show function in a post-Trump world?
I think we just try to stay very focused on the day. I think it's a mistake for us, we've realized, to try to plan too far in advance. There's a lot of content every day for us to go through, and I think we found we do our best work when we drill down on that content. For us, I think it's the same problem newspapers are having or magazines are having. We do try to do some longer lead stuff. We're really happy. A few weeks ago we got to do a piece on airline deregulation. We have a lot of those sort of lined up, and Trump pushes them back and pushes them off because you can write a piece of, hey, where's healthcare at? But if that morning, or I should say the night before, Donald Trump fires James Comey, you're going to talk about James Comey. So as far as how to approach it, it's just keep your eye on the ball.
Would you trade great ratings for a more stable world?
Oh yeah, I would always, yeah. I would take stability in the world. I have a son now. Back in the day when I was a single guy, I would just with cold hard ratings. I could burn cities down if it meant ratings, but now I have to think about the future.
Seth Meyers, thank you so much.
Thank you, I really appreciate it.
Of course, thank